The day I walked into that hospital with blood dripping from my own hand, I had no idea that within the next hour I would be standing at the edge of a choice so dangerous, so emotionally charged, and so painfully unexpected that even now, remembering it sends a tight, cold pressure through my chest. I was already weak, exhausted, and balancing on the edge of my own life falling apart. Yet somehow fate decided that this would be the moment it forced me back into a past I had buried so deeply I had convinced myself it no longer existed. When I stepped into that building, I thought I was only there to get a cut on my palm cleaned. I didn't know that the blood I was trying to stop from dripping onto the floor would be nothing compared to the blood I would soon be giving away to save a stranger. Someone whose identity would threaten to tear open every old wound I had sealed shut. My day had started like every other, with the heavy feeling of responsibility pressing against my ribs, and the quiet fear that if anything went wrong, my daughter and I would fall through the thin thread I was desperately holding on to. Being a single father wasn't something I had chosen. It was a role life had forced onto me when the person I once trusted vanished without explanation, and left me with silence as her final gift. Since then, every morning began with exhaustion, and every night ended with worry. I worked 2 part-time jobs, picked up whatever extra shifts I could, and counted every dollar until the numbers blurred. My body felt older than my age, my hands always rough, my mind always tired. But for my daughter, I tried to stand tall even when I felt like collapsing. She had no one else but me, and I refused to let her see how close I often felt to breaking. That morning, I cut my palm at work while trying to finish a job before my shift ended. The wound wasn't terrible, but it bled more than I expected. My supervisor, who barely looked me in the eye on normal days, waved me out and told me to get it checked because the company didn't want liability if it got infected. I wrapped an old rag around my hand, got into my barely functioning car, and drove to the nearest hospital with a stomach that felt both hungry and knotted from stress. My daughter was at school, unaware that her father was trying to figure out how many hours he could afford to lose before our next electric bill became a problem. When I walked into the hospital, nothing felt unusual for the first few seconds. Patients in the waiting area, nurses pushing wheelchairs, the smell of antiseptic. But then I heard tension. Sharp, urgent, unmissable. Nurses speaking in fast-clipped sentences, a doctor barking instructions, an intercom announcement calling desperately for a rare blood type. At first I ignored it, assuming it had nothing to do with me. I simply wanted to sign in, get my hand cleaned, and get back to work before my absence was noticed. But the moment the nurse at the reception desk looked at me and asked if I knew my blood type, something inside my chest tightened. I told her, and her expression changed instantly, relief mixed with urgency and something that looked like hope. She leaned closer, asking again, as if needing to confirm she heard correctly. And when I repeated it, she immediately signaled another nurse, who approached with a hurried step and eyes full of pressure. They told me someone in critical condition had lost a dangerous amount of blood and needed my type urgently. They explained that the situation was deteriorating fast, that there was no compatible donor available, and that if they didn't get blood within minutes, the patient might not survive. My first instinct was to back away. My body was already weak. I hadn't eaten since the night before. My injured hand throbbed, my head felt light, and I knew donating blood in that state could easily knock me out. And then the thought of my daughter flashed through my mind. The image of her waiting for me after school, the way she clung to me whenever she sensed I was tired, and the fear I constantly pushed down that if something ever happened to me, she would have no one. A responsible father shouldn't risk collapsing. A responsible father should put survival first. My chest burned with the weight of that truth. But there was another truth, too. One I couldn't escape. One that was stitched into who I was long before life turned me into the man I had become. I had been raised to believe that if someone needed help, and I was capable of giving it, then I should not turn away. My daughter deserved a father she could be proud of. Someone who didn't ignore a life hanging in the balance for the sake of convenience or fear. As I listened to the nurse describe the urgency, the desperation in her voice pulled me closer than the logic pushing me away. My heart pounded harder, my breath grew tight, and I felt the two parts of myself wrestling: the father who needed to be careful and the human being who needed to do the right thing. I stood there, feeling the pull from both sides, and finally something inside me snapped open with a clarity so strong that the answer came out of my mouth before I even had time to fully think it through. "I'll do it," I said. The nurse's relief was immediate and unmistakable. She nodded quickly, called out to someone behind her, and reached for my arm. In that moment, I felt a mix of fear, determination, and a strange sense of calm, as if some invisible thread had already decided the path I was supposed to take. I didn't know who I was saving. I didn't know how critical the situation really was. I didn't know that this decision would drag me straight into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I only knew I had agreed. But before I could even catch my breath, everything changed. A nurse grabbed my chart, glanced at my name, and froze. Her eyes widened with a recognition that made my stomach tighten. She leaned toward another nurse and whispered something so quietly I couldn't catch the words, but the way their faces went pale told me that whatever they saw, or whoever they thought I was, shook them deeply. And without answering a single one of my questions, they seized my arms and rushed me down the hallway toward a restricted room. The door slammed behind us, and the last thing I heard before the lights above me blurred was a panicked voice saying, "He has no idea who he's saving." The strangest part of that moment wasn't the urgency in the nurses' voices, or the way the medical staff moved around me with controlled panic. It was the quiet contradiction tearing through my chest. A contradiction so sharp that for a few seconds I felt as if I were standing outside my own body, watching a man who had no business helping anyone else step forward to save a complete stranger. I could barely afford to take care of myself, yet I had volunteered to give away something my body was already struggling to hold on to. The decision felt foolish and selfless at the same time, and even as they guided me toward a chair, my mind kept replaying the same question. Why would someone like me, someone exhausted, broke, and stretched thin, choose to carry someone else's life on his shoulders? Maybe it was because I had spent so many years telling my daughter that we must try to be the kind of people who help others even when life hasn't been kind to us. Maybe it was because she looked at me with innocent eyes, believing I was strong and dependable, even when I felt like collapsing. Being a single father meant living with the fear of failing every single day, but it also meant understanding what responsibility truly felt like. When she wrapped her small arms around my neck and whispered that she loved me, I felt something in me settle, something steady that reminded me I needed to be more than tired, more than poor, more than broken. My daughter shaped every decision I made, consciously or not. Every time I woke up at dawn, despite feeling like my bones were made of lead, I thought of her. Every shift I took, every sacrifice, every missed meal, every moment of pain was tied to her. So when the nurse told me someone desperately needed my blood, it was impossible not to imagine what it would feel like if my daughter ever depended on the kindness of a stranger. What would I hope for if she were the one lying on a table somewhere? That thought alone tightened my chest and made my hesitation feel selfish. As they led me into the donation room, another memory surfaced, one I had spent years burying, a memory of someone who once taught me that compassion wasn't a weakness. Her face flickered in my mind with painful clarity, reminding me of a time when I believed I was capable of loving without losing. It had been years since she walked out of my life without explanation, leaving behind a hollow space where trust used to be. But before she left, she had shown me what it meant to care deeply, to act with kindness even when the world felt cold. I didn't allow myself to think about her often, but in that moment, Standing in a room that smelled like antiseptic and fear, her voice echoed faintly inside me, urging me toward a choice that could cost me more than I realized. The nurse tightened the strap around my arm, and as the blood pressure cuff squeezed my skin, my thoughts grew scattered. I felt lightheaded even before the needle came close. My stomach was still empty, and the dull ache in my injured hand pulsed up my forearm. My muscles twitched from sheer exhaustion. I knew my body wasn't in the best condition to donate, and as the nurse wiped my arm with cold antiseptic, the heaviness of that truth sank into me like a stone. I wasn't supposed to push myself this hard. One wrong move, one fainting spell, one drop in blood pressure, and I could end up on the floor. But for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I stayed still. The more I looked around, the more I sensed the pressure building in the room. Nurses exchanged hurried glances. A doctor stepped in and out, muttering instructions, frustration tightening his voice. Machines beeped in quick intervals. The atmosphere was thick with fear, urgency, and something else. Something unspoken that sent a shiver up my spine. I felt as if everyone knew more than they were telling me. Every whisper sounded like a secret, and every step the staff took seemed to carry a weight I didn't understand. And the thought kept nagging at me. Who exactly was I saving? They hadn't told me anything about the patient, only that their situation was critical. But the intensity in the room didn't feel like it was just about survival. There was something personal woven into the urgency, a pressure that made my heartbeat quicken even before any blood was drawn. I felt like I had stepped into a story already in progress, one with stakes far beyond what anyone had explained to me. As my thoughts spiraled, the nurse preparing my arm suddenly paused. Her eyes drifted toward the clipboard holding my chart. She scanned my name, and something in her expression shifted. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, and her lips parted as if she was about to say something but couldn't find the words. She looked again, more carefully this time, and I noticed a faint tremble in her fingers. The room hadn't changed, but her reaction made everything around me feel different. Tenser, heavier, almost foreboding. She stared at my name for a moment longer, and I could see in her eyes that something about it meant far more to her than it should have. Her breathing hitched ever so slightly, and she stepped back, as if unsure whether to call the doctor or keep silent. I watched her, my pulse quickening, sensing the shift before she even spoke. Then, almost unconsciously, she whispered to the nurse beside her, "Do you know who he is?" The other nurse stepped closer, glanced at my chart, and froze. The shock in her eyes was immediate. Recognition flickered across her face like a sudden flash of lightning, and in that instant, I felt the first ripple of dread crawl through me. She looked up at me again, this time not as a donor, but as someone whose name meant something she wasn't ready to explain. The donation room felt colder than I expected. A sharp, sterile chill that crawled up my arms and settled against the back of my neck the moment I stepped inside. The air smelled like disinfectant and metal, and the overhead lights cast a harsh glow on every surface, making the room feel uncomfortably bright. As they guided me to the reclining chair, I felt a faint wave of dizziness pass through me. Subtle at first, but strong enough to remind me that I had come into this place already weak. I lowered myself into the chair, trying to steady my breathing, but the tension around me made the air feel heavier, as if the walls themselves understood the urgency in a way I didn't yet comprehend. When the nurse wrapped the band around my arm and began searching for a vein, the coldness of her gloves seeped into my skin, followed by the sting of the needle that pierced through with an unexpected sharpness. I winced despite trying to stay still, and the nurse murmured something soft and apologetic, though her eyes remained fixed on her task with focused precision. As the blood began to flow through the tube, a strange warmth pulsed down my arm, colliding with the growing lightness in my head. The dizziness crept in slowly, like fog rolling over a field, subtle enough to ignore at first, but impossible to resist as minutes passed. I tried telling myself that everything was fine, that I had made the right decision, but a quiet voice in the back of my mind kept whispering doubts. Had I pushed myself too far? Was I risking more than I realized? I hadn't eaten, my hand was injured, and my body already felt drained before this process even started. I could hear my pulse in my ears, a slow, thumping rhythm that felt weaker with each beat. As the room hummed with the sound of machines and hurried footsteps outside the door, my thoughts drifted, uninvited, toward the memory of the woman who had once meant everything to me. Her face flashed through my mind, unbidden but sharp, pulling at a part of me I had worked years to seal away. I remembered the warmth of her smile, the way she held my hand, like she truly believed we could survive anything, and the painful abruptness with which she had vanished from my life. She had taken so much with her when she left. My trust, my sense of security, and a version of myself I had never been able to reclaim. Even now, years later, her memory came back with a dull ache, like reopening a wound that hadn't fully healed. And for reasons I couldn't understand, thinking of her in that moment made my chest tighten. The staff moved around me in hurried motions, constantly checking my vitals, adjusting equipment, and communicating in low whispers that seemed impossible not to overhear, yet impossible to fully understand. Their voices carried urgency, tension, and something else. Something strangely cautious, as if they were walking on the edge of a secret they didn't want to slip out loud. Every time they glanced toward the room next door, the room where the unknown patient was being prepped, I could feel the atmosphere shift, thickening with anticipation. I tried to follow their conversations, hoping to piece together clues, but the dizziness blurred the edges of their words. The more I listened, the more confusing the whispers became. Mentions of critical blood loss, elevated risk factors, and a name that was never spoken fully, always cut off by another voice entering the room or a door swinging shut. The partial information fed my suspicion like fuel on a fire. Why did they look tense every time they mentioned the patient? Why did their expressions darken when they looked at my chart? Why did everyone seem so determined to avoid telling me anything? My confusion grew, mixing with the lightheadedness until I could barely tell whether the room was spinning or if it was just my imagination. My fingers tingled, my vision sharpened, then blurred again, and the warmth traveling down the tube into the donation bag felt like it was draining pieces of me I couldn't afford to lose. My breathing became shallow, each inhale feeling slightly more difficult than the one before. The nurse asked if I felt okay, but before I could answer, she looked over her shoulder at the doctor outside, worry etched across her features. It was undeniable now. Something wasn't right. The tension wasn't just medical. It felt personal, as if there was a connection between me and the patient that the staff was aware of, but I was not. I tried to sit up slightly, but my body felt heavy, too sluggish to respond properly. The dizziness tightened its grip, spreading like a slow, suffocating wave. My heart fluttered with a sudden unevenness that made the nurse rush toward me, telling me to stay still. Even through the haze, I could hear muffled voices arguing softly outside the door, their tones sharp with conflict. Someone asked, "Does he know?" Another whispered back, "No, and he can't find out right now." The words slithered into my mind like ice. Know what? Find out what? What could possibly connect me, a struggling father, to whoever lay dying in the next room? The nurse beside me leaned closer to check the tube, her breath unsteady. She turned when another nurse rushed in with a chart in hand, and that nurse spoke the patient's name. Clearly, loudly, unmistakably. A name I hadn't heard in years. A name that crashed through my mind like a breaking wave. A name that froze every muscle in my body. Before I could process it, before I could even force my lips to move or my lungs to pull in air, the dizziness swelled all at once, blinding and heavy. The room darkened at the edges, my limbs went numb, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. And then everything went black. The first thing I felt when consciousness started clawing its way back into me was a strange mixture of weightlessness and heaviness, as if my body had forgotten how to belong to itself. My eyelids were too heavy to lift, my throat felt dry, and my limbs buzzed with a dull numbness that made it difficult to understand whether I was awake or drifting somewhere between reality and a dream. But then I heard it. Soft footsteps around me, hushed whispers, and the quiet beep of machines. Sounds that didn't belong to the donation room. When I finally forced my eyes open, blinking through the blur, I realized I was lying in a completely different hospital bed, surrounded by nurses who looked at me not with irritation or routine professionalism, but with an expression I didn't understand at first. Concern mixed with something bordering on admiration. It took several seconds for my vision to settle, and when it did, I saw a semicircle of nurses hovering near the foot of the bed, all of them watching me with an intensity that felt strangely out of place. They weren't frantic, but there was a stiffness in their posture, a tension in their eyes, as if they were carefully choosing how much of themselves they should reveal. One of them stepped forward, forcing a polite smile that didn't quite mask the anxiety beneath it, and asked how I was feeling. Her voice was gentle, but the look in her eyes made me feel like I had done something extraordinary, something far greater than simply donating blood. I tried sitting up, but a surge of weakness crashed through my body, pushing me back into the pillows. My head throbbed, my mouth tasted metallic, and even my breathing felt uneven, as if my lungs had forgotten their rhythm. Confusion swallowed me whole. I remembered the room spinning, the needle in my arm, the whispers, the shock of hearing a familiar name. Then nothing. Just darkness. And now I was here, in a room I didn't recognize. What happened? I asked, my voice barely more than a rasp. Where am I? Why am I here? The nurses exchanged glances before one stepped closer, her smile tight and overly practiced. You fainted, she said carefully. Your body was under a lot of stress. We moved you here to recover. Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine completely, and something about the way she phrased her answer felt incomplete, as if she had said the part she was allowed to say and left the rest buried behind her silence. I fainted, I repeated slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of my memory. That's it? I fainted? So you moved me to a whole different room? Another nurse jumped in quickly, offering a soft laugh that sounded a little too forced. You gave a significant amount of blood. You were already weak before the donation, so we needed to monitor you more closely. Still, the explanation felt hollow. My mind raced. My chest tightened with unease. Something was off. In a weak attempt to make sense of everything, I asked, Did it help? The donation? The air around the nurses shifted, almost like a ripple passing through them all at once. Their smiles grew stiffer. Their eyes softened with a strange mixture of relief and unspoken tension. Yes, one of them said after a moment. Your blood made a critical difference. You saved someone important. The phrase hung in the air like a weight. Someone important. Important how? Important to whom? My heart stumbled in its rhythm as I stared at them, waiting for more, but they didn't offer a single detail. Instead, they avoided my gaze, pretending to fix the blankets or check the IV line beside me. Their behavior wasn't simply polite. It was careful, guarded, as if I had unknowingly stepped into a situation layered with secrets they weren't prepared to share. I felt the pressure in my chest deepen. Who did I save? I asked, pushing the words out even though my throat felt tight. I heard a name earlier. I think I recognized it. Tell me who they are. Again, the nurses exchanged glances. Their expressions tightened. Their silence grew louder. Something unspoken passed between them, a message I wasn't meant to understand. One finally responded, her voice soft and deliberately vague. "We can't share details right now. The doctor will explain when he comes." The doctor. Always the doctor. Always later. Never now. My frustration mingled with fear. Not fear for myself, fear for my daughter. I had left her with a neighbor, promising I'd be back soon. I hadn't expected to faint. I hadn't expected to be moved to another room. I hadn't expected to be kept in the dark. If too much time passed, she would worry. Or worse, she would think I had forgotten her. I tried to swing my legs off the bed, but the moment my feet touched the floor, weakness surged through my body, forcing me to grab the railing for support. The nurses rushed to my side immediately, urging me to lie back down, insisting that I couldn't leave yet. Their insistence wasn't rude, it was strangely protective, as if they needed me to stay put, not just for my health, but because something about my presence mattered. Something they weren't ready for me to discover. But I needed answers. I needed to know who I had almost passed out trying to save. I needed to know why these nurses looked at me the way they did, why they spoke in circles, why they avoided saying the name I had heard before everything faded. "I need to talk to someone," I said firmly, even though my voice trembled. "I need to know who the patient is." Silence. Soft glances exchanged. A hint of panic flickering in one nurse's eyes. Then the door opened. A doctor stepped inside, his expression serious, almost grave. He looked at me with a level of intensity that made the room feel smaller. And in a calm but heavy voice, he said, "The patient you saved is awake, and she specifically asked to see you." When the doctor said the patient had reacted emotionally after hearing my name, something inside me shifted. Slowly at first, like a floor tilting beneath my feet. And then suddenly, sharply, as if the ground had dropped entirely. His words didn't make sense. I was a nobody, just a struggling father trying to keep his life from falling apart. Why would a stranger care about who donated blood to save them? Why would my name cause an emotional reaction strong enough for a doctor to mention it? The confusion left a strange, hollow feeling in my chest, something between fear and disbelief. And the longer I stared at the doctor's expression, the more I sensed that this wasn't the kind of mystery that ended with a simple explanation. I opened my mouth to ask for answers, demanding to know who exactly the patient was and why she wanted to see me. But the doctor raised a hand gently, stopping me mid-sentence. His expression was careful, almost cautious, as if he were navigating a topic surrounded by invisible tripwires. "I'll explain once we get there," he said, his tone firm but oddly sympathetic, as if he already knew that whatever waited for me down that hallway would shake me far more than any medical complication. "I don't want to go anywhere until you tell me who she is," I insisted. But he only repeated the same frustrating assurance, urging me to follow him. Against my better judgment, I swung my legs off the bed, still feeling the lingering weakness in my limbs. The dizziness threatened to return as my feet hit the cold floor, but I steadied myself on the railing and took a slow breath. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I needed to know why this stranger wanted to see me so urgently, why my name mattered, and why the staff kept treating me like I was somehow connected to something I didn't understand. The doctor walked out of the room, and I followed him into the hallway, where the lights felt too bright, the floors too polished, and every echo of footsteps behind us too sharp. As we moved through the corridor, I felt a strange familiarity tugging at me. Not with the place itself, but with the patient's name, the one I had heard faintly before passing out. I couldn't fully grasp it, but it clung to the edges of my memory like a shadow. Something half-remembered and unsettlingly close to a part of my life I had long tried to silence. As we passed by two nurses, I heard them whispering in low, urgent tones. "They're bringing him now," one said. "She asked for him twice. After everything that happened, I can't believe—" "Shh! Don't say that out loud." Their words made my stomach twist. Nothing made sense. Who was she? Why did she have enough influence to make the staff so tense? A few steps later, I overheard another pair of staff members talking, this time not whispering, but still in tones that carried meaning. She owns 3 properties in the city? Not just that, she's connected to the Bennett Foundation. You know how high profile that is. Imagine the media storm if anything happened to her. Wealth, influence, recognition. This wasn't just any patient. This wasn't someone who would normally know a man like me even existed. The doctor glanced at me briefly, as if measuring my reaction, then said, "She insisted on meeting you as soon as she regained consciousness. She was still weak, but she wouldn't let anyone else in until she confirmed you were awake." His voice lowered slightly. "There's something she wants to say to you." My anxiety spiked sharply, rising from my stomach into my chest like a wave threatening to choke me. Something about this felt too personal, too targeted, too familiar. I tried telling myself this was all just coincidence, that the name I thought I heard earlier was just my exhausted mind playing tricks. There was no reason, none at all, for someone wealthy, important, and hospitalized to react emotionally to hearing my name. My life had been small for so long. My world had shrunk to my daughter, my bills, my shifts. The past was supposed to stay in the past. But memories don't stay buried forever. Some push their way back at the worst possible moment. Images flickered through my mind. An old apartment hallway, a woman with a soft laugh leaning against a windowsill, warm hands holding mine during nights when hope still existed, and the crushing silence she left behind when she disappeared without explanation. I remembered the pain of losing her, the confusion, the anger, the months of searching for closure I never found. As we neared the restricted wing, the doctor slowed his pace, giving me a look that carried something heavier than professionalism. "Before we go in," he said quietly, "just prepare yourself." She seemed emotionally overwhelmed when she recognized your name. Recognized my name? The words hit me with a force that nearly stopped me in my tracks. I tried to convince myself it was impossible. Plenty of people shared last names. Plenty of people had names that sounded similar when spoken in a rush. It couldn't be her. Not after all these years. Not after everything that had happened. Not after she had vanished like I never mattered. But the doubt kept tightening its grip around my ribs. We reached the end of the hallway, where a single door stood slightly ajar. Light from inside spilled across the floor, forming a pale strip beneath my feet. I stopped just outside the room, my breath caught in my throat, my heartbeat pounding unevenly. Then I heard it. A voice. Soft, weak, but familiar in a way that made every muscle in my body freeze. A voice I had once loved. A voice I had once trusted. A voice I hadn't heard since the day she walked out of my life. And in that instant, I realized exactly who was waiting for me on the other side of that door. The door was only a few steps away when a nurse appeared beside me, her expression tight with something between sympathy and hesitation. She glanced at the doctor, who gave her a small nod. Permission, or maybe confirmation, that this was the moment I needed the truth. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if the name she was about to speak carried a weight too heavy for the hallway to hold. "It's her," she whispered. "The patient you saved. Her name is Evelyn Bennett." The sound of that name hit me like a physical blow, sharp enough that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The world around me blurred at the edges, the fluorescent lights above dissolving into white streaks. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, as if the floor had tilted, dropping me back into a past I had spent years trying to bury. Evelyn Bennett. A name that once felt like home, like possibility, like the kind of future I had been foolish enough to believe I deserved. A name that had burned itself into every corner of my life before she disappeared and left that life in pieces. I stared at the nurse, unable to speak. My mouth felt dry, my chest tight, my pulse a rapid, frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. It didn't feel real. Not the hospital, not the donation, not the hallway around me. It felt like a cruel trick, the kind of nightmare that drags you backward into memories you've worked too hard to escape. Because the moment she said that name, the past didn't just return. It swallowed me whole. I saw myself standing in a small apartment kitchen years ago, holding 2 mugs of coffee, waiting for her to come back from the hallway, where she said she needed a minute alone. I remembered thinking it was strange how quiet she had become that week, how distracted her smiles looked, how distant her touch felt. I remembered brushing it off, convincing myself she was tired, stressed, overwhelmed, anything but preparing to leave. And then I remembered the silence that followed. The door left slightly open, her coat gone, her suitcase missing, and her phone number suddenly disconnected. No note, no explanation, not even a lie to soften the blow. She vanished overnight without a single reason, leaving me lost, confused, and angry in ways that reshaped the entire core of who I became. For months afterward, I questioned everything. My worth, my judgment, whether I had imagined the love I thought we shared. Her absence created a wound so deep that even time couldn't fully numb it. And now she was here, lying behind that door, her life held together by the blood in my veins. I felt confusion rising inside me, sharp and suffocating. Why her? Why now? Why would fate bring me here? Of all places, of all situations, when I had finally learned to live without the ghost of her memory haunting me. My hands trembled slightly, and I forced them into fists by my sides. Couldn't tell if it was the lingering weakness from the donation, or the surge of emotion tearing through me. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the air too thin. Every breath scraped against my lungs. I stepped back from the door, my body frozen with indecision. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk out of the hospital, and leave the past exactly where it belonged. If I walked away now, she would never know I was the donor. She wouldn't know I had been here. She wouldn't know I had saved her. I could protect myself from opening old wounds, from facing the questions I had buried for years. But another part of me, stronger, more desperate, needed to see her. Needed to know why fate had forced our paths to cross again, needed to confront the person who had once shaped my world and then shattered it without hesitation. My breathing grew heavier, uneven, almost painful. Memories collided with present reality in a way that made my chest ache. I leaned against the wall for a moment, closing my eyes, trying to find a piece of calm in the storm inside me. But there was no calm. No steady ground, only the echo of her name repeating in my mind like a wound reopening. Evelyn Bennett. Every syllable shook something loose inside me. I didn't know if I was walking into closure or into chaos, into answers or into pain, but there was no running from this. Not anymore. Not when her voice had already reached me through the door, thin and fragile, reminding me of a chapter I never truly closed. I opened my eyes and exhaled shakily, forcing myself to take a step forward. Then another. The doctor moved aside, giving me space, watching me with an expression that suggested he understood far more than I wanted anyone to understand. For a moment, I hesitated, with my hand inches from the doorframe. My heart hammered so hard I felt the pulse in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Every memory begged me to move forward. After a long, trembling breath, I pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the weak rustle of fabric. She lay on the bed, pale against the white sheets, her hair spread across the pillow in waves I hadn't seen in years. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, like life had taken more from her than I ever realized. And then she turned her head toward me. Her eyes widened, filling with something raw and unmistakably familiar. And in a voice cracked with weakness but shaped by the memory of who I used to be to her, she whispered, "Jacob?" But then, with a trembling breath, she said the nickname only she ever called me, Jace. The moment she spoke my old nickname, the one I hadn't heard in years, something inside me twisted so sharply that for a few seconds I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink around us, the walls pushing closer, the air thickening with the weight of everything unsaid between us. Standing there, frozen in the doorway, I felt as though I had been caught between two versions of my life, the man I had struggled to become and the man I used to be when she was still a part of my world. Seeing her again felt like a collision between those two timelines, violent and disorienting, leaving me unable to decide whether I should stay or walk out before the past swallowed me whole. She looked different now. Older, polished, transformed into someone who had clearly built a life far removed from the cramped apartments and late-night takeouts we once shared. The hospital gown did little to hide the aura of wealth surrounding her. Her hair, though disheveled from the medical equipment, carried the unmistakable sheen of someone who had access to the best salons in the city. The subtle manicure on her nails, the diamond-studded bracelet resting on the bedside table, the faint scent of a perfume I recognized from advertisements rather than stores I could ever afford. All of it painted a picture of a woman who had risen high into a world I could never reach. But her eyes were the same, and they ruined me the moment I met them. They held the same depth as before, but now there was something else behind them. Pain, regret, fear, and a sorrow that seemed to sink into the very color of her irises. Those eyes used to look at me with warmth and promise. Now they looked at me like she was afraid I would disappear if she blinked. Seeing that expression on her face was almost unbearable, because it forced me to confront a truth I never wanted to revisit. I had once loved her deeply, fully, in a way that had never faded no matter how hard I had tried to bury it. She lifted a trembling hand to her mouth as tears welled up, spilling over before she could stop them. Her breath hitched, her shoulders shook, and for a moment she looked so fragile that I instinctively took a step forward. My mind screamed at me to stay still, to remember the abandonment, the silence, the wounds she left behind. But the part of me that once cared refused to stand frozen while she fell apart in front of me. "Jace," she whispered again, her voice cracking under the weight of the years between us. You saved my life." Her words were thick with emotion, each syllable trembling as if she could barely hold them together. She didn't know, not yet, that when I donated my blood, I had no idea who it was for. That the name the nurse spoke only reached me after I had already given too much of myself to turn back. She believed I had done it knowingly, intentionally, out of some old loyalty or love. The irony of that almost made me laugh, but there was nothing funny about the ache spreading across my chest. I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, that I hadn't known it was her, that I had acted only out of instinct and not out of loyalty. But the words wouldn't come. Part of me didn't want to hurt her when she was already shaking. Another part of me didn't know how to speak through the tangled emotions suffocating me from the inside. She reached for my hand then, slowly, hesitantly, as though I were a flame she was terrified of touching. Her fingers hovered near mine, but didn't make contact at first, trembling with uncertainty. That small gesture, tiny, fragile, desperate, hit me harder than I expected. She was afraid. Afraid of my anger. Afraid of my rejection. Afraid that I had become someone who didn't want her anymore. When her fingertips finally landed on my hand, the shock of the touch shot up my arm like a jolt. It was familiar and foreign at the same time. I should have pulled away. I should have stepped back. But I didn't move. I just stood there, letting her hold my hand with a fragility that made my heart feel heavier than any exhaustion I'd ever known. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance to breathe." I swallowed hard, heat rising in my throat, anger and sadness tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate one from the other. This moment, This painful, twisted reunion should have given me clarity, but instead it left me drowning in questions I had buried years ago. Questions that had never received answers. Questions that had shaped every guarded part of me. And one question towered above all the others. The question that had haunted me every night after she disappeared. The question that built the walls around my heart. My voice trembled as I finally forced the words out. "Why did you leave?" Her face crumpled, her expression collapsing under the weight of something deeper than regret. She squeezed my hand weakly, her breath shaky, her eyes filling with a fear I didn't understand. "Jace," she whispered, her voice fragile as glass. "There's something you never knew. Something I should have told you years ago." She swallowed hard, tears streaking down her face as if the truth itself was painful to speak. "And it's something that will change everything." The moment she said there was something I never knew, something that would change everything, a cold ripple went through me. Slow at first, then spreading like frost across every inch of my chest. I stood at the edge of her hospital bed, my hand still in hers, my breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and dread. Whatever she was about to say didn't feel small. It didn't feel like an apology or a simple misunderstanding. It felt like a truth wrapped in years of silence, a truth so heavy she could barely lift her own voice to speak it. She inhaled shakily, her fingers tightening around mine with a fragile desperation. "Jace, I didn't leave you by choice." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. The words didn't fit with the pain I'd lived with for years. They didn't match the image I had created of her walking away because she didn't love me enough to stay. My mind rebelled against it, trying to hold on to the anger I had carried like armor, because that anger had been the only thing protecting me from the heartbreak. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice low, strained. Her eyes flickered away as if she didn't have the strength to meet my gaze while pulling apart the memories she had kept locked inside. "I was taken away from you," she whispered, "dragged out of our life before I could even breathe." The words hung between us like a storm cloud about to break open. She swallowed, and with trembling breaths, she finally began to speak, not as the polished, wealthy woman she had become, but as the terrified young woman she once was. "My family found out about us," she said, her voice thin and fragile, "about how serious we were becoming. They didn't think you were enough." The word "enough" struck me like a bruise being hit again. I felt heat rise in my chest, anger mixing with humiliation. Of course, her family. I remembered the tension, the looks, the cold warnings they thought I didn't notice. I had always sensed they disapproved of me, but I never imagined they had the power, or the willingness, to tear her away completely. "They confronted me," she continued, wiping her tear-streaked cheek with the back of her hand. "They said if I didn't leave you, they would destroy everything around you. Your job, your home, your future. They said you would never recover from the consequences, and I believed them. I was young. I didn't know how to fight them." I felt as if the floor had shifted under me again. My heart pounded with anger, but the anger wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the people who thought they had the right to dismantle our lives. But then another emotion followed closely behind. Confusion, disbelief, the sharp ache of betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my attempt to stay calm. "Why didn't you come to me? We could have figured something out." She shook her head quickly, tears falling faster now. "I tried, Jace, I swear I tried. I called you, I sent letters, I left voicemails. But they intercepted everything. They controlled every move I made until they got me out of the city." Her voice broke. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I disappeared because they made sure you believed I didn't care anymore." My breath caught painfully in my throat. All those nights I spent wondering why she left. All those days I questioned my worth. The years I built walls around my heart to stop myself from hoping. And the entire time, she had been trapped in a situation I knew nothing about. My emotions tangled inside me, anger, sorrow, disbelief, the instinct to comfort her battling against the instinct to protect myself from reopening old wounds. My hands felt unsteady, my lungs tight. She took another breath, forcing herself to keep going. When I finally escaped their control, they had already taken everything from me. They cut me off financially. They made me start my life from nothing. I was alone. Completely alone. I blinked, taking in her words. It was difficult to imagine her alone. This woman who now owned properties, who held influence, who carried the kind of confidence only time and struggle could build. Yet her voice held no pride as she spoke about her success. Only exhaustion. I worked 3 jobs, she said softly. I slept in shelters. I learned to survive without them. And eventually, I built something. Not because I wanted wealth, but because I needed to prove I could stand on my own. I needed to become someone they couldn't control anymore. Her transformation suddenly made sense. The polished exterior, the power behind her name, the steel in her voice despite her weakness. She had built her fortune not out of privilege, but out of survival. I always thought, she continued, her voice trembling, that if I ever crossed paths with you again, you would hate me, and you would have every right to. I didn't answer, because I didn't know how to. Part of me wanted to reach for her and tell her she wasn't alone. Part of me wanted to scream at her for letting me suffer in silence. Part of me wanted to walk away before the pain swallowed me whole. She saw the conflict in my eyes, and lowered her gaze, letting silence stretch between us like a slow, painful echo. "Jace," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "There's something else. Something I never told you. Something I should have told you before they took me away." My heart stilled. Her fingers twisted nervously in the blanket. Her breathing grew unsteady. And then, with a trembling voice that seemed to carry the weight of years, she said, "There's more, and you deserve to know the whole truth." The moment she said there was more, the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Her voice trembled. Her fingers twisted nervously in the blanket, and her eyes darted away from mine as if the truth she was about to reveal carried a weight too heavy to release all at once. I felt the tension rising inside me, a slow tightening that crawled through my ribs and settled deep in my stomach. Whatever she had confessed so far had already shaken the foundation of everything I thought I knew, but the way she struggled to form her next sentence told me that the real blow was still coming. "Jace," she whispered, swallowing hard as tears pooled in her eyes. "There's something I never had the chance to tell you. Something I should have told you the moment I found out." Her voice cracked, and a quiet sob escaped her lips before she caught it, pressing trembling fingers against her mouth. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, though I wasn't sure if it was out of instinct or fear. The suspense stretched unbearably, every second feeling like it was pulling me further into a place where the truth could either save me or break me apart all over again. She took a shaky breath, her shoulders trembling. "I found out I was pregnant, after they forced me away from you." For a moment, I thought I misunderstood her. The words hit me so hard they didn't feel real. Not at first. Pregnant. The sound of the word echoed in my head, bouncing painfully as I tried to grasp it. My pulse roared in my ears, a loud, heavy thundering that made it impossible to think clearly. My body swayed slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the mattress to steady myself. You were pregnant?" I finally managed to say, though my voice felt foreign, thin, barely even audible. She nodded slowly, tears spilling freely now, carving lines down her pale cheeks. "I was terrified, Jace. Terrified of what my family would do if they found out. They already hated the idea of us being together. They told me I was ruining my future. That you were ruining it. When they found out I planned to tell you, they made sure I couldn't." I felt a sharp, stabbing sensation inside my chest, like a knife twisting into a wound I didn't know still existed. Every emotion collided at once: shock, devastation, anger, disbelief. I couldn't tell where one feeling ended and another began. The room around me blurred at the edges as if the world itself couldn't hold steady under the weight of her confession. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice breaking despite my attempt to stay composed. "I had a right to know. You should have told me. I would have done anything." "I know," she whispered, cutting me off through her sobs. "I know you would have. That's why they didn't let me reach you. They took my phone. They watched me constantly. They threatened you, Jace. They threatened you and the baby. They told me if I tried to contact you, they would make sure neither of you ever had a peaceful life." My stomach twisted. It hurt to breathe. I sank slowly into the chair beside her bed, unable to trust my legs to hold me anymore. "You should have fought harder," I said quietly, though even as the words left my mouth, I could hear the pain inside them. "You should have found a way back." "I tried," she insisted, leaning forward weakly. "You have no idea how hard I tried. But I was alone, scared, broke, and constantly watched. Every time I tried to reach out, they shut down the attempt before it could reach you. I carried our child while feeling like the world was closing in around me, and I hated myself every single day for not being strong enough to break free." Her voice cracked completely, and she broke into full sobs, her hands covering her face. The sound tore through the room, raw and unfiltered, the kind of grief that came from years of silence and unspoken truth. Watching her crumble like that made something inside me twist painfully. Not forgiveness, not anger, but a fragile, devastating mix of both. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. Her disappearance, the forced separation, the threats, the pregnancy, the years of silence. Everything I thought I knew about the past fractured, rearranging into a truth I never saw coming. The magnitude of what she hid, what she endured, began to settle slowly, painfully, into place. And then another part of her story hit me with a fresh wave of panic. The baby. Our child. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Where is the child?" Her breath caught sharply, and for a moment she didn't speak. Her hands shook, her lips trembled. Fear, raw, deep, and unmistakable, crossed her face. "I wanted to protect you," she said, her voice trembling violently. "I did what I thought would keep you safe. And I'm so sorry. I hated myself for hiding it. But I didn't know what else to do." My chest ached, a physical pain I couldn't ignore. "Evelyn, please, just tell me." She lifted her eyes to mine, eyes full of guilt, fear, and something else I couldn't name. "There's more you don't know, Jace," she whispered, "more than you can imagine." Her breath shuddered as she leaned closer. "The child, your child, might still be out there." My heart stopped. Completely. "And they might need your help." Her last words, "The child might still be out there, and they might need your help," echoed inside me with a force that felt almost violent. It was like the ground beneath the hospital bed shifted, tilting the entire room into unfamiliar territory. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't even breathe. Every memory I had of her, every wound she left behind, every late night I spent wondering why she walked away, all of it tangled into a suffocating knot inside my chest. And now, suddenly, I wasn't just facing the woman who broke me. I was facing the possibility that somewhere in the world there might be a child, my child, who had lived years without me even knowing they existed. Her confession didn't just reopen old wounds. It split them wide open. I stared at her, unable to speak, as my mind attempted to sift through everything at once. The anger I carried for years, the pain of abandonment, the grief I never confronted, the shock of learning she had fought battles I didn't know existed, and the terrifying possibility that forgiveness might be more complicated than I ever imagined. A part of me wanted to yell at her, to unleash the hurt that had lived inside me for so long, to make her feel even a fraction of the emptiness she left behind. But another part of me, quieter, steadier, felt the full truth of her tears, felt the sincerity woven through her voice, felt the immense burden she had carried alone. "How do you expect me to process this?" I finally whispered, my voice rough with emotion. "You disappeared. You broke me. And now you're telling me that you were pregnant, that we had a child, and that I never even knew? Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Her face contorted with pain. She reached for my hand again, but this time I pulled it back. The hurt in her eyes deepened, but she didn't stop speaking. "I know I hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know I failed you, but I was trying to protect you, Jace. I swear to you on everything I have left, I never wanted to stay away. I never wanted to keep our child from you. I just didn't know how to fight them. And when I finally tried, it was already too late." I turned away, running a shaking hand through my hair as my heart raced. My daughter's face flashed through my mind, her innocence, her trust, her dependence on me. How would this revelation change her life? How would it change mine? How would I explain to her that she might have a sibling somewhere out there? And what would I do if that child truly needed me? The questions pressed against me like weights, threatening to crush the air from my lungs. I felt trapped between two realities: the life I had built after she left, and the life that now might have existed without me for years. She continued to speak, her words soft and broken. "I never stopped thinking about you. Even when I had nothing, even when I was sleeping on floors, even when I was starving, I thought about you, about the family we should have been. But I was so scared. Scared that you'd blame me. Scared that you'd hate me. Scared that you'd never forgive me." I turned back toward her, unable to hide the storm inside me. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "I don't even know what forgiveness looks like anymore." Her lips trembled. "Then let me earn it. Please, Jace, let me try. I don't want to lose you again. Not now, not after everything." Before I could respond, the door swung open. The doctor rushed inside, his expression tense and urgent. The shift in the room was immediate, electric, alarming. The doctor moved quickly to her bedside, checking her monitors, adjusting equipment. The nurses followed behind him, their faces tight with concern. "What's happening?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. The doctor didn't look up as he answered, his voice clipped and urgent. "Her condition is worsening. The blood loss earlier was severe, and her body is struggling to stabilize. We need to monitor her closely." Her breathing became shallow, her eyes fluttering with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She reached for my hand again, this time with desperation, not hesitation. Her grip was weak but urgent, as if she feared the slightest distance between us might swallow her whole. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not again. Please." Her words pierced through every wall I had built, hitting a place so vulnerable I didn't know how to protect it. I felt torn apart, split between the part of me that wanted to run from the pain and the part that couldn't walk away from her even if I tried. I stood there, her hand trembling in mine, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. If I stayed, I would be reopening a chapter I had spent years trying to close. If I walked away, I would never know the truth about our child, or the truth about her. It was a choice I never expected to face, a choice that would redefine everything. I opened my mouth, trying to form words, trying to decide, trying to breathe. But before I could, an alarm blared loudly in the room. Her heart monitor spiked, then began to drop. Fast, terrifyingly fast. Nurses rushed forward. The doctor shouted orders. Her fingers tightened around mine one last time before slipping. And as the chaotic beeping filled the room, my entire world tilted. Her heart rate continued to fall. The moment the alarm went off, the entire room erupted into chaos. Sharp commands, hurried footsteps, equipment clattering, and the rapid-fire urgency of people trained to fight death with every second they had. My heart slammed into my chest as the monitors beside her bed flashed in frantic patterns, her heartbeat spiraling downward in a way that made my pulse stutter with terror. Nurses rushed to her side, adjusting tubes, calling out numbers, preparing injections. The doctor leaned over her, barking instructions with a precision born from desperation. "Her pressure is dropping. Move, move! She's crashing! Push 1 milligram, now!" Everything dissolved into a blur. I took a step forward, my instinct screaming to stay beside her, to hold her hand, to not let her slip away again. But before I could reach her, someone grabbed my arm. One of the nurses, her face tight with urgency, pulled me back. "Sir, you have to step outside," she said firmly. "We need the space to work." "No, just let me stay." "You can't be in here right now," she insisted, her voice sharper, cutting through the panic around us. Before I could fight it, she guided me through the door. The moment it shut behind me, the sounds inside the room became muffled chaos. Still loud, still terrifying, but now separated from me by a barrier I couldn't break through. I pressed my palm against the cold wood of the door, my breath shaking uncontrollably, my body refusing to accept the distance between us. Helplessness washed over me, heavy and crushing. It felt like drowning while standing perfectly still. Inside, they were fighting for her life. Out here, there was nothing I could do. Nothing but wait. Nothing but remember. And memories I had spent years burying, came flooding back with a force I wasn't ready for. I saw her laughing in our tiny kitchen, her hand brushing flour off my nose as we burned pancakes together. I saw her curled beside me on the couch, tracing circles on my wrist as she whispered dreams about a future we were foolish enough to believe belonged to us. I saw the softness in her eyes during the quiet moments, the way she held me like she never planned on letting go. Then the memories shifted. The silence after she vanished. The nights I stayed awake with a heart that refused to stop hurting. The ache that gnawed at me for years, telling me I wasn't enough for her to stay. The moment I learned she was taken. The moment she told me she had been pregnant. Our child. A child I never knew existed. The weight of that truth crushed me all over again. My legs nearly buckled, and I leaned against the wall, forcing myself to breathe. Emotion surged through me in waves, fear, anger, heartbreak, confusion, and underneath all of it, something even more terrifying. I still cared. I still cared deeply, more than I wanted to admit. And the thought of losing her now, again, felt unbearable in a way I hadn't expected. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. A helpless sound escaped my throat, part sob, part gasp. I pressed my hand to my face, struggling to keep myself together. I didn't want to care, not after everything she had put me through. I didn't want to feel this attached, this vulnerable, this terrified. But no matter how hard I tried to deny it, the truth rose up inside me like a tide I couldn't stop. She still mattered. Despite the pain, despite the past, despite everything, she still mattered. A nurse rushed past me, and I caught her arm lightly, my voice shaking. "How is she? Please, tell me something." She hesitated, glancing towards the room, then back at me. Her expression softened slightly. "The next few minutes are critical," she said quietly. "We're doing everything we can, but she's unstable. Just stay nearby." Stay nearby. Stay. Wait. Hope. Fear. Her words were both a warning and a plea. I nodded weakly, releasing her arm. My body felt heavy, my legs unsteady, but I forced myself to stay close to the door. I paced back and forth, stopping every few seconds to lean closer, trying to make sense of the muffled voices inside. The hall felt colder. The lights felt dimmer. The seconds stretched long enough to feel like hours. My heartbeat thudded painfully against my ribs. At some point, I whispered into the empty hallway, a confession that felt ripped from the center of my chest. I don't want to lose you again. The admission hung in the air, fragile and raw, and for the first time in years, I didn't try to take it back. I just let it stay. The door finally opened. The doctor stepped out, his face pale, his eyes heavy, his posture weary in a way that made my stomach plummet before he even spoke a word. He closed the door behind him quietly, too quietly. And when he looked at me, there was no comfort in his expression, no reassurance, only gravity. A grave expression that told me the next words out of his mouth could shatter or save the last pieces of my world. The doctor stood in front of me for a long moment without speaking, and in that silence, my entire world seemed to balance on a single, fragile breath. His grave expression felt like a weight pressing against my chest, squeezing every bit of hope I had left. I braced myself, every muscle in my body tightening as if preparing for a blow I wasn't sure I could survive. Finally, he exhaled. "She's stable," he said quietly. "Barely. But she's alive." For a second, everything inside me stopped. My thoughts, my fear, even my heartbeat. Then emotion crashed into me so hard my knees nearly buckled. Relief, overwhelming and dizzying, swept through me like a tide breaking open. I didn't realize how tightly I had been holding my breath until it escaped in a shaky rush. My hand pressed to my chest instinctively, as if making sure my heart was still there, still beating, still capable of feeling something so fiercely. Alive. She was alive. The doctor placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "She's unconscious, but she pulled through the worst of it. You can see her once she stabilizes." Then he added, almost gently, "Be prepared. She's weak. Very weak." I nodded, unable to find words, still trying to process the reality that she hadn't slipped away. Not like before. Not without warning. Not without answers. When I finally stepped back into her room, the chaos had vanished, replaced by a quiet stillness. The machines hummed softly. The lights were dimmer now, and she lay motionless, her breaths shallow but steady. I moved closer, pulling a chair beside her bed. For a long while, I just sat there, watching her chest rise and fall, each breath proof that the universe had granted us something I never thought we'd have again. Time. Time to understand. Time to confront. Time to rebuild. Or finally let go. Seeing her like this, fragile, silent, stripped of the defenses life had forced her to build, made something in me soften. The anger I carried for years didn't disappear, but it shifted, untangling itself from the heartbreak I had held on to for so long. The truth she revealed had torn us open, but in a strange way, it had also stitched something back together. I reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. My voice came out low, almost a whisper. "I don't know where this leaves us. I don't know how to forgive all of it. But I'm here, and I'm listening. That's more than I ever thought I'd give again." If she had died, I knew I would have been left with a lifetime of questions. Questions that would have haunted me, eaten away at me, twisted the memories of our past into something far darker. But she had survived. And because she survived, the path ahead, no matter how difficult, was ours to face together, not mine to face alone. I leaned back in the chair, letting the reality settle inside me. Donating blood had seemed like an impulsive act of kindness, something I did because it felt right in the moment. But that single decision had dragged me into a truth I never expected to face again. It forced me to confront everything I'd been running from. The past I tried to bury, the love I tried to forget, the wounds I tried to pretend had healed. It also handed me a responsibility I never knew existed. A child. My child. Somewhere out there. That truth pulsed louder than any other. As I sat beside her, watching her breathe, I felt the weight of that revelation settle into my bones. Not a burden. Something deeper. Something like purpose. If our child was alive, if they truly existed, then everything from this point forward would change. My life, my daughter's life, Evelyn's life, every path would shift. Forgiveness suddenly felt less like a gift and more like a necessity, a bridge to something larger than either of us. Hours passed in silence, the kind of silence that reshapes you, clearing away the noise until only what matters remains. I thought about who I was before she left, who I became after she disappeared, and who I needed to be now that the truth had come crashing through every wall I built. I wasn't the same man she once loved, and she wasn't the same woman who walked away. But despite everything, despite the pain, the fear, the years, we were still tied together by something we couldn't ignore. She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering, her lips parting as if she were trying to form words. I leaned forward, watching her carefully, waiting for any sign of awareness. Her voice was faint, barely a breath, but real. "Jace? I'm right here," I said softly. "You're okay. You're safe." Her fingers moved slowly across the sheet, searching, and I took her hand gently. She sighed at the contact, a fragile sound that felt like both relief and apology. Her eyes opened just enough for me to see that same familiar depth, the same pain, the same longing, the same unspoken connection. "We have to find them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to find our child." My heart clenched, and in that moment I knew this story wasn't ending here. This was only the beginning of a road neither of us knew how to walk, but one we would have to face together. Because somewhere out there, a truth waited, a truth that could heal us, or break us all over again. And the last unanswered question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. Where was our child? If this journey pulled you into a world of secrets, heartbreak, and impossible choices, make sure you stay with us by subscribing, because the next chapter may reveal truths even more shocking than this one, and you won't want to miss what comes next.